we're going to talk about the Tabstrip Control. Before I do that, let me show you a little example. In this example, I'm showing names of knots, and when I have selected the beginner tab, I just see these two. Intermediate, I add a couple more, and for advanced, I don't want to see the simple ones, but I'll see the intermediate ones and a couple of additional ones. So that's what these tabs are for, to give you different views of your controls on your user interface based on the selection of the tab. Okay, so now to create a tab strip, you just click on the tab strip icon and draw the tab strip on your user form the usual way. It's in the toolbox on Windows, it's in the developer ribbon on the Mac, but basically they work the same way on both platforms. So initially you're going to have two tabs when you create your tab strip, and they start numbering at 0. So those are tabs 0 and 1, although they say tab 1 and tab 2, which is a little weird, but that's how it works. Now you want to give your tab strip a meaningful name, and I always encourage you to use a standard prefix when you name controls, and the one we'll use for tab strips is TBS. So I'm going to call mine TBS example. Okay, now this is what it looked like when I first created my tab strip. I'm working on Windows here, and you can see the two tabs. I haven't renamed them or anything yet, and I did resize it a little bit. Now, as you saw when I ran my example, I eventually made it a little bit bigger. You can make it whatever size you want within your user form. Now, when you want to work on an individual tab, what you do is you select the tab strip control, so click on that, then hold down Shift and click on the tab you want to work on. That will select the tab, and if you then right-click it, you'll get a shortcut menu that lets you move, delete, or add tabs. So this is a picture of what that looks like. Now it says page, but you're working on the tabs. So new page creates a new tab, an additional tab. Delete deletes one, the one you selected. Rename lets you change what it says up here on the caption of the tab. And move lets you change the order of the tabs. So what I did was I created these two tabs. I named one beginner and one advanced by using this rename thing. Then I created an additional tab and named it intermediate. So that gave me this. And now, of course, I want to put intermediate in between beginner and advanced. So I use the move command, and it shows me this little menu where I can pick intermediate and move it up. So that's what I did to get the order that I wanted. Now, in your program, you may want to actually have your program select a tab, especially initially. So we have to know how to refer to the individual tabs in our code. In the object hierarchy, you have your tab strip, so in my case TBS example, and the tabs themselves are called items, and they're members of the tab strip. So to get the actual item, you use selected item like this. So tbs.selected item gives you the number of the selected tab. And again, remember, they start with 0. Now, this is a read-only property. You cannot set which tab is selected by changing this in your program. What you have to do instead is use a value property. So if I set tbsExample.value equals 1 in my program, then the second tab will show up as selected. Okay, the middle one in my case. Your first job is going to be to get the tab strip to show up, the form to show up when you open your program. So as usual, we're going to put a shell command in the code for the workbook. So that's in this module, the one for this workbook, and it just says to show our form. Okay, now here is what my user interface looks like as I built it. So here you see all 6 of those checkboxes. even though you never see them all at once when you're running the program, you see them all here. So I put them on the picture, and what I want, again, is to show the top row on the beginner tab. I want to show the top 2 rows on the intermediate tab and the bottom 2 rows on the advanced tab. Now this is important. While I'm using a tab strip here rather than a multi-page, which is a very closely connected control, because what I want is to have some overlap between my 3 different views. Now if all 3 views were completely separate, then there would be no reason to use the tab strip, and I should use the multi-page instead, because then I wouldn't have to write code to make things show up or not show up, which I did in this case. Okay, so here's my code that I run initially when I want the beginner tab to show up. And like I just discussed earlier, what I'm doing is setting the value of my tab strip to be 0. And that makes the selected item be item 0. It shows the first tab. And then what I did was use the visible property of my checkboxes to make the first 2 show up and the other 4 not show up. Okay, now here I'm just showing you the structure. What I have here is I figure out what the index is. So every time someone clicks a tab, I'm going to run this program because it's an event procedure based on having a change take place in my tab strip, meaning somebody clicked on a tab. So tab index is going to be the index of the item that was selected, and this is how I get that, how I read it. I use that selected item.index property. Okay, and then I'm going to do a different case depending on which one is selected. If it's the beginner tab 0, then the first 2 are true and the rest are false. If it's the intermediate tab 1, then the first 4 are true and the last 2 are false. And finally, for the last tab, number 2, when I start from 0, I'm going to have the first 2 false and the rest of them true. So here's a picture of what it looks like when the beginner tab is selected, the intermediate tab is selected, and the advanced tab is selected. Okay, so that should give you a good idea of how to use these, and it's a nice feature, a nice control for situations like this where you want to have varying views without having to load a whole different form.